I love the diversity of the park. I love that every season is different, especially on Bear Island. You go over there in the summer, it's completely different than when you go over in the winter. And there's definite seasons here. It's not the same thing every day.
Located on North Carolina's central coast, Hammocks Beach State Park encompasses over 1,500 acres of maritime forest, fertile estuaries, and 4 undeveloped barrier islands. The largest, known as Bear Island, lies 2.5 miles offshore and remains pristine and undeveloped, accessible only by water.
I remember my parents taking me to Hammocks Beach State Park as a child. When I travel around the country and people ask me where I'm from and I say North Carolina, they instantly say, oh, I've been to Nags Head or I've been to the Outer Banks. And so, North Carolina is known for having beautiful beaches. It's known for a place of recreation where people from all over the world come to explore our water recreational activities. What I try to remind people is that during the era of Jim Crow, African Americans did not have access to these public spaces. Segregation touched every aspect of life for African Americans in the South. In 1963, when Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. writes a letter from a Birmingham jail, he mentions the fact that his 6-year-old daughter cannot attend an amusement park.
When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children.
Civil rights activists did not make any differences between having access to a public school, access to a lunch counter, or access to a park or beach. They saw this all as opportunities where African Americans were being denied citizenship. We forget the fact that just going on vacation required you to be able to navigate the racial climate of the area wherever you were traveling to.
Hammocks Beach State Park's history, in many ways, parallels our country's own struggles against racial injustice. The park's journey began with William Sharp. Born in 1882, Sharp was a Harvard-educated neurosurgeon. His views on racial inequality and justice, combined with his deep love of the outdoors, were the foundation of the park's creation.
In 1912 or 1914, he and some colleagues from the hospital that he worked at in New York City decide that they're going to visit Onslow County, North Carolina on a hunting trip.
North Carolina's Outer Banks offered an unspoiled retreat from crowded cities along the eastern seaboard. The pristine coastal waters provided abundant waterfowl hunting and fishing opportunities. East Coast train networks provided convenient travel.
These were wealthy white physicians, and so as they oftentimes did on vacation, they would hire local people to serve as their assistants. Someone that would help them navigate the land, that would help them to find food every night, and to make sure that they have adequate and decent accommodations. So when Dr. Sharp comes to North Carolina, he somehow links up with John Hurst.
I first met John L. Hurst, the Negro who became my friend and teacher during the fall of 1914, when I was invited by a group of older physicians and surgeons to spend a week hunting ducks and geese along the coast of North Carolina. After arriving at the Onslow Rod and Gun Club some 20 miles below Jacksonville, I was assigned to a small boat manned by an alert young Negro in his early 20s. His duty was to carry me to the duck blinds and pick up the ducks and geese that I shot. John didn't have much retrieving to do, so later, after I insisted, John gave me a few pointers to improve my shooting, with such good results that I asked the club to assign them to me all the time. In this rather accidental and casual manner, a close friendship developed.
Born in 1893, John Lewis Hurst was known as a highly skilled and talented outdoorsman, mechanic, and farmer. Hurst's passion for the wildlife and landscape of the coastal environment was a perfect fit for his work as a guide at the Onslow County Rod and Gun Club. A journal of hunting trips to the club from 1917 mentions John Hurst in an entry. Monday, August 21st, 1917. The deer swam across with Kate and John after it. But John Hurst, the driver, called the dogs back, and the hunt was all off without result. John Hurst claiming the moon was wrong.
John Hurst considered the animals his friends. He didn't want to kill any of the animals because they were his friends. And he had a relationship with the land that was unique in that, you know, he considered the wildlife and the fauna and the flowers and everything else part of the world he lived in.
Dr. Sharp loved this hunting trip so much, and he loved the area, that he decides he wants to purchase land in Onslow County and make it a vacation home, a place where he and his family can come once or twice a year. And he decides Mr. Hurst will be the man to help him find this perfect spot.
John Hurst spent several years looking for a property that would fit Dr. Sharp's needs, and he finally found the Hammocks. It's described in his autobiography as 4,600 acres, but that included all the marshlands, what's now the Intercoastal Waterway and everything, but it was 810 acres on the mainland.
Hurst managed the farm, sited on a peninsula surrounded by coastal marshes. The elevated terrain was filled with longleaf pine, live oaks, and other hardwoods. The deep humus-rich soil provided ideal land for agriculture and wildlife. Hurst and Sharp soon set out developing the property, raising livestock and planting the fertile Hammocks acreage with tobacco, cotton, and soybeans. Hurst managed the construction of homes for Dr. Sharp and the Hurst family that looked out on the Sounds and Barrier Islands.
When Dr. Sharp bought the Hammocks, he put Mr. John Lewis Hurst in charge of it. And there were people in the community who didn't think that a black man should be in charge of that farm and the island and all of that. So they went to Dr. Sharp and asked him to remove him, but Dr. Sharp would not do it.
Shortly after we occupied it with John as manager, various white men of the area came to see me during my monthly visits to apply for John's position. Their argument was that no Negro can order and handle other Negro tenants and workers. A white man must be boss here in the South. That did not make sense to me, as I saw repeatedly how well John and the tenants were working together. I refused to make the change. It was not long before I received unsigned letters threatening damage unless a white man became manager. In rebuttal, I inserted a notice in the local paper offering a reward of $5,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of anyone damaging the Hammocks or injuring his personnel, and there was no further trouble.
It was not known well that the Dr. Sharp had two houses down on the Hammocks. He had a three-story house on the mainland, and he built a couple of story houses out on the knoll of the waterfront on Bear Island. And the local people burned down the house on Bear Island as a warning to him.
In North Carolina, there were several private beaches that were owned by black families or owned by white businessmen who catered to African Americans. You had places like Seabreeze or the Freeman Beach, both right outside of Wilmington. Show Island begins in the 1920s and it's burned to the ground in 1926. At Seabreeze and Freeman Beaches, there was oftentimes the problem of having to deal with white hostility, with night riders riding through the beach and taunting black tourists.
John Hurst's first wife, Lydia Spicer, died during childbirth. In 1926, at the age of 32, Hurst married his second wife, Gertrude. Gertrude was the daughter of a slave and had taught herself to read and write with a typewriter purchased from wages earned picking cotton. She went on to work as a housekeeper and cook for Dr. Sharp, saying she could earn more money cooking than teaching in the segregated schools.
She was an educated woman, very smart, very wise woman. She had to be wise to live during that time. They would not sell Mrs. Hurst or her family trout, flounder, or any of that expensive fish. They wouldn't sell it to them. They could buy the croakers, they could buy the spot, they could buy the mullet. So Mrs. Hurst said when she really want a flounder or really want a trout, she'd go over to the fish house and she'd say, Dr. Sharp is coming and I need some trout, or I need some flounder. And they would sell it to her. When I was a young boy, I got a fish bone in my throat. They had to take me to the doctor to get it out. So I did not eat fish. I never ate another fish again. But when I moved here, I ate a lot of meals with Miss Gertrude. I wasn't married, and so I ate a lot of meals at her house. Mrs. Gertrude Hurst ate a fish every day. Every day she ate a fish. And she told me, she says, Cruz, I am going to get you to eating fish. And she taught me how to eat fish, and I love them. I love them. I eat at least once a week.
The ensuing decades deepened the bonds between Sharp and the Hurst families. As Dr. Sharp's career grew, the Hammocks was a place where he could get away from the demands of his medical practice, teaching, and overseas travel.
There wasn't any phone lines, there wasn't any electric lines. It was just a peninsula out here surrounded by water that, you didn't have all that. It was a great relaxation place. But they'd go fishing. He tells stories in his book about going out with John and the boat motor breaking down and John taking a bar of soap and holding over the carburetor and getting the motor running again. During Prohibition, the bootleggers would leave casks of whiskey when they unloaded them on the hammocks, and John had a map and he would bury the whiskey, and then when Dr. Sharp would come down with his friends, they always had some good spirits to enjoy.
Looking back over the 38 years, I realize I've gained from him more off-the-beaten-track, common-sense, useful bits of knowledge than from any other man. Not only because he's a master at farming, stock raising, and outdoor life, but because he is a philosopher. To him, the good luck to have been born compensates for the many tragedies of his life.
As he develops this lifelong friendship with the Hurst family, he realizes that he's had access to beaches in North Carolina that they could never imagine visiting. And so he wants to right that wrong in his own way. Dr. Sharp, in his memoir, talks about one of his closest friends from childhood, who was a black classmate growing up with him in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who he believed to be smarter than him. He said this was a black guy who did better than me in the classroom, who was more confident, who was more knowledgeable, who was more well-read. But because of race and class intersecting, this young man did not have the same opportunities that Dr. Sharp ended up having educationally. So Dr. Sharp goes on to Harvard University for undergrad and then for medical school, while his friend stays and takes a factory job in Philadelphia. That always stayed in the back of Dr. Sharp's mind.
At the age of 67, Dr. Sharp began making plans to transfer the Hammocks to Gertrude and John Hurst.
The Hurst family was very hesitant to accept this property because of concerns about local whites having opposition to a black family owning such a large parcel of land in a community that was known for anti-black violence.
And Mrs. Hurst, through sensible reality, said, we can't even pay the taxes on this place, so don't let us fool ourselves. We can't take this place. But Ms. Hurst was teaching, and she said there's a large group of African Americans who might be able to build and finance this development, and she suggested the North Carolina Teachers Association.
The North Carolina Teachers Association was perhaps the most prominent and powerful organization of African Americans in the state for most of the 20th century. This was a group of individuals that had some of the most prominent educators in the country to head the organization. So this was an organization of African Americans, men and women, who found strength in numbers to ensure that African American children received a quality education, whether they're negotiating for a longer school term or they're negotiating for textbooks that present African Americans in a positive light. They found ways to improve educational opportunities for Black youth.
The Hammocks was the answer to a prayer of a recreational facility, a waterfront, and all that we could develop and enjoy. God's gift of the skies, the seas, and the animal life.
By 1950, the transfer of the property to the North Carolina Teachers Association was finalized. The Hammocks also provide an ideal meeting place for members to share ideas and strategies for the looming civil rights struggles that lay ahead.
We met at the Hammocks with large groups of teachers. That was when we were trying to get everybody on board with the busing. We've had workshops at the Hammocks Beach where teachers were trained not only in the integration of school methods, but we had to train teachers how to now work with their counterparts from the other race. So we had some summer workshops that dealt with integration of school. We had some summer workshops that dealt with how to get along in a diverse situation. The Hammocks played a good role in a nice setting for the kinds of things ahead of us.
In 1961, the Teachers Association deeded much of Bear Island to the state. The transfer resulted in the creation of North Carolina's first coastal park for African Americans during the era of segregation. In addition to creating the park, the association hoped the exchange would result in the building of a bridge to Bear Island. Claude Cruz started his career at the segregated Hammocks Beach State Park as an attendant. He went on to become the park's first superintendent.
There were only three state parks in the state of North Carolina that blacks could attend. When I first came in, it was still on the rough side.
Hammocks Beach operated literally in the backyard of a sundown town because these sundown towns were places where African Americans could not be after dark. Essentially, this meant these are places where African Americans are not wanted.
In our community, and I mean the black community, the colored community, you're told what to do. And when I moved to this area, I didn't live in Swansboro. I lived in a black community called Silverdale. It's about 6 miles up the road, 7 miles up the road. It's where I live. And I went to church there, and they found out that I was working in Swansboro. They would say, there's certain things you don't do in Swansboro. You just don't do them. And we were told that. We were told, you don't be in Swansboro after the sun go down. At that time, in the 60s, you don't want to be down there. You don't want to be down there after the sun go down. And I took heed to that.
The fact that steps from one of these sundown towns, African Americans are owning beachfront property, shows just how significant and remarkable the Hammocks Beach story truly is.
It took a building of trust and confidence in people to begin to trust us, to see what we were going, make sure that we weren't rowdy, and the people coming in were spending money. And that changed. It started in probably 69, 70. People found out that money was green. So then the town began to open up and accept us more.
While the land transfer created the first North Carolina coastal park for African Americans in the age of segregation, the association hopes for a bridge were never fulfilled.
Teachers Association and the Hammocks Beach Corporation thought they were going to get a bridge. The park provided a ferry, and there was some animosity between the two for a number of years after that.
My personal opinion, I don't think it should have been a bridge. It would have just ruined the whole thing. I mean, if they put a bridge in it. The island's 892 acres, but you put a bridge, how many cars are you going to get over there? Where are you going to park them? You got to flatten out all this land, and I think it would have been terrible.
The segregated Hammocks Beach State Park opened in 1961. This was soon followed by the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964, which desegregated all state parks.
When we first started, boats were contracted out to carry people to the island. The first contractor we had was out of Morehead City. When white people started to come, he would tell them, you don't want to go over there. That's for the black, that's for the colored. You do not want to go over there. And he told it to the wrong person. And they went back to Raleigh and said something about it. So in 1974, the state decided they would purchase their own boats. So the boats have been running ever since then. The park has come a long ways. You have to educate your public to what you're doing, and that's what we had to do at Hammocks. The turtle program at Hammocks, I started that. The full moon in June, when the turtles would come out, the people from Swansboro and the area would go over in their boat to watch the turtles. Some came actually to watch the turtles, some came to harass the turtles, some came to get the turtle eggs. Then I asked for help on counting, and they got us interns who came down. The first year there was 2 girls, and I called them the Turtle Girls. And they would walk the beach at night looking for turtles, tagging, counting, seeing how many eggs they laid, that type of thing. And that program is still going on now, today. That program is still going on at the park. It's one of the first ones that was started in the state.
With the Civil Rights Act, all beaches in North Carolina become open to African Americans. So African Americans from all over the state now have access to going to Wrightsville Beach. They can now go to Nags Head. They can now go to Topsail Island. They can now go to the Outer Banks. And so Hammocks Beach, that was still very much in its infancy, that still wasn't as developed and didn't have as many opportunities as these larger, more established beaches, begins to be less popular with black vacationers.
The White Teacher Association and the Black Teacher Association merged in 70 or 71. And after that, the Hammocks Beach Corporation went into some funding issues, and ultimately the property was split up. The last part of it went to the state park system in 2015.
This recent 290-acre addition creates even more opportunities for visitors.
We were a very seasonal park up until now. We ran our ferry in the summer months, April to October, and then the end of October to the beginning of April really was not a lot for people to do because we only had the 30 acres on the mainland. And now with this additional property, we can have hiking trails. People will be able to come, they can drive up to their campsite, do their campfire, their s'mores, enjoy the nice peaceful evening, get up in the morning, catch the ferry to the island, enjoy the beach, and come back and do their camping thing in the evening. It'll be a completely different experience for people.
We now have a park that contains the whole coastal ecosystem. We have uplands, we have the Hammocks, which is the highest point on the Hammocks is probably 40 feet above sea level, which is significant elevation on coastal North Carolina. So we have the Hammocks, which is high uplands, all the way through the marsh and the wetlands, through the Sound, all the way to the Barrier Islands, and several other islands that are great habitat. We have it all represented in one park, and North Carolina state parks are about the natural resource.
There weren't a lot of people thinking about conservation when Dr. Sharp was. And so for him to think, we really need to protect this and to educate people with this, past his lifetime, it was a tremendous benefit to not only North Carolina, but, the country. We get visitors from all over the country and all over the world. And without his thoughtfulness behind saving, Bear Island and the Hammocks, we wouldn't be where we are today. There would be nothing left. It would all be developed.
It's largely still undeveloped, and that's only because developers didn't have access to it for much of the 20th century. So in many ways, the Hammocks Beach we see today is a reminder of the resiliency and the determination of African Americans to have access to coastal recreation. African Americans pulled their resources together and secured beach property, and I see that as an act of resistance, even though they weren't welcomed in coastal communities, and even though beaches had been described as whites-only places, they found a way to make their presence known. They found a way to create opportunities for fishing and swimming at the coast. And in doing so, they demonstrated their humanity and they demonstrated their citizenship to a state and nation that often ignored it.
Funding for this program was provided by the Friends of Hammocks and Bear Island Incorporated and viewers like you. Thank you.